3 weeks ago, I had never heard of Slovenia. If you had asked me where it was on a map, I probably would have guessed somewhere near Slovakia, which shows you exactly how much I knew about European geography. But sometimes the best travel discoveries happen when you're not even trying to discover anything at all. I was taking what I thought would be a simple train journey from Vienna to Venice. One of those scenic routes through the Austrian Alps that travel magazines always rave about. My plan was straightforward. Catch the morning train, enjoy the mountain scenery, arrive in Venice by evening, and spend a few days pretending I was sophisticated enough to appreciate Italian art and overpriced canal-side restaurants. The problem with plans, especially travel plans, is that they rarely survive contact with reality. About 3 hours into the journey, somewhere between admiring the Austrian countryside and reading my guidebook, I fell asleep. Not just a quick nap, but the kind of deep, jet-lag sleep that makes you completely lose track of time and place. I woke up to the conductor gently shaking my shoulder and speaking in a language I couldn't identify. The train had stopped, and through the window I could see what looked like a beautiful European train station with Art Nouveau architecture that seemed oddly familiar yet completely foreign at the same time. The conductor was patient, smiling, and clearly used to confused tourists. But I had absolutely no idea where I was. Ljubljana, he said, pointing to a sign on the platform. End of line for this train. Venice connection left 20 minutes ago. Ljubljana. I stared at the word, trying to process what had happened. I had somehow ended up in the capital of a country I couldn't even pronounce, with no idea how to get to my intended destination and a phone battery that had died somewhere between unconsciousness and confusion. Standing on that platform with my suitcase, looking around at signs in what I later learned was Slovenian, I felt that particular mix of panic and excitement that comes with being completely lost in a foreign country. This wasn't part of the plan. This was exactly the opposite of the plan. But as I would discover over the next few days, sometimes the universe knows better than your carefully researched itinerary. The information desk at Ljubljana's train station became my first introduction to Slovenian hospitality, and it set the tone for everything that followed. The woman behind the counter, who looked to be in her 30s with the kind of multilingual confidence you only find in smaller European countries, listened to my story with genuine amusement rather than the barely concealed irritation I expected. "Oh, you discovered Slovenia by accident," she said in English that was clearer than what I hear from most American teenagers. "This happens more often than you might think. People miss connections, take wrong trains, follow GPS directions that lead them here instead of Slovakia. But once they're here, most people don't want to leave." She wasn't just being polite. As she explained the options for getting to Venice, which involved either waiting until the next morning or taking a rather circuitous route through Austria, she also started telling me about Ljubljana itself. The way she described the city made it sound like some kind of European fairy tale that had somehow survived intact, while the rest of the continent had been overrun by tour buses and Instagram photographers. "The old town is completely car-free," she explained, drawing a rough map on the back of a train schedule. "Everything is walking distance. The castle overlooks the river, there are sidewalk cafes everywhere, and the people are friendly because we don't get enough tourists to make us cynical yet." That last comment stuck with me. Here was a European capital that hadn't been discovered by the crowds. In an age when every charming European destination seems to be drowning in selfie stick-wielding tourists and overpriced restaurants catering to international visitors, the idea of finding an undiscovered gem seemed almost too good to be true. I decided to stay the night and explore Ljubljana before continuing to Venice. It was a decision that completely changed my perspective on European travel and, as it turns out, my retirement plans. Walking from the train station into Ljubljana's city center feels like stepping back in time to when European cities were designed for people rather than cars. The streets are narrow and winding, lined with buildings that span centuries of architectural styles. From medieval foundations to Baroque facades to Art Nouveau details that reminded me why I fell in love with European travel in the first place. But what struck me most was the pace of life. In Vienna, people walk with purpose, heads down, focused on reaching their destinations. In Ljubljana, people stroll. They stop to chat with neighbors. They linger at crosswalks to let cars pass without any sense of urgency. They sit at outdoor cafes and actually seem to be enjoying themselves rather than just checking boxes on their tourist itineraries. I found myself at a sidewalk cafe along the Ljubljana River, which winds through the heart of the old town like a liquid ribbon reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. The waiter, a man about my age with silver hair and a genuine smile, didn't rush me to order or hover impatiently while I studied the menu. When I admitted I had no idea what to drink, he suggested a local white wine and brought me a small plate of local cheese without my asking for it. "Where are you from?" he asked. And when I told him America, his eyes lit up with genuine curiosity rather than the calculating look you'll get in most tourist destinations when vendors realize you're carrying American dollars. We ended up talking for nearly an hour about travel, about retirement, about the differences between American and European approaches to work and leisure. He had worked in Germany for several years when he was younger, he told me, but had returned to Ljubljana because he missed the quality of life. The slower pace, the human-scale city, the ability to walk everywhere, the fact that you could afford to live well without working yourself to death. As we talked, I found myself watching the life of the city unfold around me. Couples walking hand in hand along the river paths, families with children feeding ducks from the old stone bridges, elderly people sitting on benches watching the world go by without any apparent schedule to keep. This was the Europe I remembered from travel brochures from 30 years ago, before mass tourism changed everything. The wine cost €1.50. The cheese was complimentary. The conversation was priceless. That evening, I walked up to Ljubljana Castle, which overlooks the city from a hill that provides panoramic views of the old town, the river, and the mountains that ring the valley like protective walls. The walk up is gentle enough for anyone with reasonable mobility, and there's a funicular if you prefer not to walk. But I chose to walk, partly for the exercise and partly because I was in no hurry to get anywhere. From the castle walls, Ljubljana spread out below me like a living postcard. The red tile roofs of the old town caught the golden light of sunset. The river reflected the sky like a mirror, and the Alps in the distance provided a backdrop that would make Switzerland jealous. But what impressed me most was what I didn't see. No cruise ships disgorging thousands of passengers. No lines of tour buses clogging the streets. No crowds of people holding selfie sticks and jostling for position at scenic viewpoints. I had stumbled into a European capital that had somehow remained undiscovered by mass tourism, and I was beginning to understand why the woman at the train station had smiled when she said that most people don't want to leave. The next morning, I should have caught the early train to Venice. Instead, I found myself extending my stay and booking a rental car to explore more of Slovenia. What I discovered over the next 5 days completely changed my understanding of what European travel could still offer to someone my age, who had grown tired of fighting crowds and paying premium prices for mediocre experiences. Lake Bled, which is about an hour's drive from Ljubljana, is what happens when a fairy tale location exists in real life. Picture a pristine alpine lake surrounded by mountains with a medieval castle that perches on a cliff overlooking emerald water so clear you can see fish swimming 20 feet down. In the middle of the lake sits a small island with a Baroque church that looks like something from a children's storybook. But here's what makes Lake Bled different from every other scenic European destination. You can actually enjoy it. There are no crowds fighting for photos, no vendors hawking souvenirs. No tour guides herding groups of exhausted tourists from viewpoint to viewpoint. You can rent a traditional wooden boat called a pletna and row out to the island at your own pace, climb the church tower if you feel like it, or just sit by the water and watch swans glide by in perfect silence. I spent an entire afternoon doing exactly that. The boat rental cost €14 for the whole day. The church visit was optional and cost €3. The famous Bled cream cake at the Park Hotel, which has been served to visitors since the 1990s, cost €4 and was worth every bite. Compare that to similar experiences in Switzerland or Austria, where the same afternoon would cost 10 times as much and include 10 times as many tourists. But Lake Bled was just the beginning. Slovenia, I was learning, is like a greatest hits collection of European landscapes compressed into a country you can drive across in 3 hours. It has Alps that rival Switzerland, wine regions that compete with Tuscany, and a tiny stretch of Adriatic coastline that offers Mediterranean charm without Croatian crowds or Italian prices. I've found myself in the Vipava Valley, Slovenia's wine region, purely by accident when I took a wrong turn looking for a restaurant someone had recommended. Rolling hills covered in vineyards stretched to the Italian border, dotted with family wineries that have been operating for generations. At Kabaj Winery, the owner took me on a personal tour of her vineyards, explained their organic growing methods, and served a 6-course lunch paired with their wines. The cost was €35, including the wine. In Napa Valley, the same experience would cost $200 and require booking months in advance. Here, I was the only visitor on a Tuesday afternoon, and the owner treated me like a long-lost friend rather than a walking credit card. The wine, by the way, was exceptional. Slovenian winemakers have been perfecting their craft for over 2,000 years. But because Slovenia was hidden behind the Iron Curtain for 50 years, their wines never developed international recognition. You can buy bottles that would cost 50 to 80 euros in France or Italy for 8 to 12 euros at the winery. As my accidental Slovenia adventure continued, I began to realize I had discovered something remarkable. A European country that offered everything I loved about places like Austria, Switzerland, and northern Italy, but without the crowds, the attitude, and the prices that have made those destinations increasingly difficult to enjoy. Slovenia has proper Alps with hiking trails, cable cars, and mountain lakes that look like someone cranked up the saturation on a photograph. It has sophisticated cities with museums, galleries, and cultural events. It has a wine and food culture that takes itself seriously without taking tourists for granted. It has healthcare that actually works, infrastructure that functions, and people who seem genuinely happy to meet visitors from other countries. Most importantly, for someone my age, it has a pace of life that allows you to actually experience these things rather than just photograph them and move on to the next attraction. By my 5th day in Slovenia, I was no longer thinking about continuing to Venice. I was thinking about coming back. And by the time I finally caught a train out of Ljubljana a week later than planned, I was already researching real estate prices and residency requirements. Slovenia isn't perfect. It's a small country with a limited international profile, which means fewer direct flights and less tourist infrastructure in some areas. The weather can be unpredictable, and if you need constant nightlife and entertainment, you might find it quiet. But for someone looking for quality of life, natural beauty, cultural richness, and value for money, it's hard to imagine a better combination. I'm now seriously considering buying a house in Radoveljica, a medieval town just 10 minutes from Lake Bled. A 3-bedroom house with mountain views costs around €180,000. The same property in Austria would cost €800,000, and in Switzerland you probably couldn't buy it at all as a foreigner. Slovenia feels like stepping back in time to when European travel was about discovery rather than consumption, when locals welcomed visitors because they weren't overwhelmed by them, and when you could afford to spend time in a place rather than just passing through. I accidentally discovered Slovenia 3 weeks ago. Now I'm planning to call it home. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned to visit.